All right, welcome to episode 2 of Claude Code from Zero. I'm Blaze, and today we're going to be talking about context, both in a conceptual sense, like what is it, and some explanations there, and then also in a working sense of what it looks like in a Claude Code workflow, and some commands and things you can use to manage it. So that being said, I kind of just did a quick Google search for you to see, but what context really is just all the data that a model has in a given conversation to reason through and achieve a task. So, in an agentic loop like Claude Code CLI, that's going to be all the prompts that we've given, all the responses it's given us back. It's going to be all the tools at its disposal and the documentation it has around using those. It's going to be all the custom rules, skills, and things that we've written in our workflows. All of that is going to compile into its working memory essentially, and it's going to use all that in the tasks that you give it. So, as far as what that really looks like, every time you run a Claude command to initialize a Claude instance, you kind of create this main context window. And the reason it's called a context window is because it is limited. So, like in this example, I think I said 200K, which is like the smaller Opus model, I think uses 200K tokens. The bigger models use 1 million. But still, there's a limited context window. And all that means is that once all these rules and tools and things and all this knowledge that this model has exceed a certain amount of context, which is measured in tokens, they will no longer be able to see everything. And you'll start to have recall issues and the performance will start to degrade. And so, because of that, these models have been researched and there is a limitation on how many tokens they can load into their working memory at once. And as far as what a token is, I kind of left a note here. It's just a standardized unit of measurement for context, and it's roughly 3/4 of a word. But it's good to know what tokens are because a lot of times your cost basis that you'll calculate for different agentic workflows and stuff will be based around the cost per token and how many tokens you're using on average. So good to understand the relationship there. But that being said, all of these things kind of in these two blocks here are what Claude uses to manage its context. And you'll hear them called different things. I tend to use composables because it makes sense, especially in the terms of like skills, subagents, your Claude MD and rules, the memory. These are all just markdown files, but they're special markdown files that are configured a certain way to structure and organize the different pieces of context that we want to use within our Claude Code workflows. And they all do different things. We're going to get in that a little bit more depth in future videos where I'll kind of break down some of the key ones. But for this video, just know that there is an organizational system that Claude uses very strategically to organize and optimize how context is loaded and used. And they all behave differently, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, so at a high level, this is how context is managed within Claude. This is kind of what it looks like when you initialize a session. You're kind of in this main thread, and this is where you'll have your conversation. And as you have your conversation, these different pieces of composables, the prompts and things you give, the artifacts that are generated, like code files and stuff, will begin to fill up your context window. And eventually, you'll either finish your conversation and clear, or you might approach the limit and have to do some other things. So let's talk about that. Let's go over to a terminal. Claude. So there's a few key commands that we can use to manage our context. The first one is just context. If we do this, you're going to see some MCP stuff. Just ignore that for now. What we care about is this context breakdown. So we can see this is going to show us our current thread, and ours should be pretty empty because we haven't had any conversation yet. We just started. It'll show us everything that's loaded into our current context broken down. So we can see we have about 65% that's empty. We haven't used it yet, but we also have some that's going to be used off the gate because of preloaded context, which we're going to talk about in the next video when we talk about like Claude MD's rules and memory. But the idea here is we got some system prompt things, the baseline behavior the model should take, some system tools. So, what tools are configured for Claude. MCPs, I have a couple of global MCPs that I use that are going to take up a little bit of space here. And then there would be skills and then prompts and things I send. And we can see these are pretty empty because I don't have any skills on my desktop. And I haven't sent any messages yet. So this is a good way to audit how you're doing as far as context usage. A lot of times I'll run this throughout a conversation if I think it's getting kind of lengthy. And so I can strategize about my context management if I'm afraid that I might start pushing up on that context limit. On the topic of context limits, there's also a compact So what a compact does is if you see that you're approaching up on that limit, it'll take everything loaded into your context and it'll try and summarize it down to only the most essential stuff. And that way it can shrink the context and win you a little bit more free space. I tend not to run this manually for two reasons. For one, if you're managing your context well with composables and things like that, you really shouldn't be compacting that much. Like you should be able to avoid that. Um, but in a pinch, every once in a while it happens. But the other reason is that Claude will actually auto compact for you if it gets to a certain threshold, and I don't know it off the top of my head. But when it starts getting pretty close to that limit on the context window, it'll suggest doing a compact. You really, really want to avoid compacting because it does degrade the performance in the workflow. Because even though it tries to keep the most essential things, it doesn't keep everything. And so you really want to be working with as much context as possible where you can. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with how to optimize and avoid that scenario. But that being said, it's good to know what a compact is. The last one I'll kind of talk about is clear. So you can run a clear and it'll actually clear the conversation, just like if you double command or double control seed and exited the Claude instance like this. And then I run Claude again to initialize a new session. I get the same effect. It's just a clean slate. So here we don't have any context, so you really should be clearing liberally. I tend to do it between every workflow. So like if I go in and do something and then I'm about to go do something else, unless it is like directly related to what I just did, I'm hitting a clear in between each of those because that keeps my context nice and focused. Because you will get weird behaviors if your context gets too misconstrued. Like if you've done like 3 or 4 tasks in the same thread and they were totally unrelated, Claude might get confused about context from the first task in the third one or things like that. So it's better to just keep a clean, focused slate for each task. And also that just keeps your context window small. Or sorry, it keeps your context window usage small or as small as possible. There actually is one more that we'll cover, and that's rewind. So if I hit a rewind, there's nothing to do here. But like, let's say I was a few stages into a conversation, so I'll say, hey, Claude, and then we'll just do a couple of prompts. Hey, how can I help you today? How's your day going? Now, if I hit a rewind, I can actually rewind the conversation back to a previous conversation state. So if Claude kind of went off the rails or I made a mistake a few steps back and I just would really like to kind of go back, I can do that. And I can also rewind code changes. Now, there aren't any code changes in our example, but if there were, I could undo them both. Quick little sidecar. Do not think this replaces version control because it's not that reliable, but it will help you in a pinch if you like mess up some code and you need to kind of revert. It'll work. And then one more, I know I keep saying that, is restore, I think, or resume. Resume will let you open old conversations, and they'll stay in your memory for a while. So like you can see, I've had a few conversations. You can see how many takes it's taken me to get this video right. But if you wanted to, like, if you accidentally close your Claude instance, like I hit that double control C a few minutes ago, or, like you had a conversation earlier in the day and you want to go back to that, you can hit a resume and you can actually reload that context. And it'll stay in here for a while. I think it stays either like a week or it might even be like 30 days. I'm not really sure off the top of my head, but it will stay in there for a while and you can kind of restore conversations to pick up where you left off if you need to. But yeah, in the next video, I'm going to get more in depth with composables and kind of context engineering with them. But for the most part, this is the overview of what context is and how it looks in Claude as far as auditing and controlling it with commands. As you get better and better with these tools, you're going to find that more and more your job is context engineering. So rather than going and writing a lot of code, it's what resources do you need to give the agent to go do it for you. And so it's going to become, how do you engineer composables the best way? How do you gather resources to give it knowledge the best way? How do you organize that the best way? It's almost like a whole new skill set. But with that being said, I'll see you in episode 3. Thank you.